Marcus Chun wiped the sweat from his forehead as he dragged the heavy recycling unit down the dimly lit corridor of Nexus Station's lower level. The artificial gravity generators hummed overhead with their familiar, slightly off-key vibration that meant they were overdue for maintenance. Again, everything down here was overdue for maintenance, including Marcus himself, if he was being honest. At 28, Marcus had been working the waste management systems of humanity's largest space station for 6 years. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and it kept him fed. More importantly, it kept him invisible. In a galaxy where humans were still considered the newcomers, still proving themselves worthy of a seat at the galactic table, being invisible was often the difference between life and death. The corridors stretched ahead of him, lined with the standard gray paneling that covered every surface in the lower levels. Overhead, the recycled air carried the usual mixture of industrial coolant, ozone from the electrical systems, and the faint metallic tang that spoke of too many different species sharing the same atmosphere processors. Marcus had long since stopped noticing the smell. He was thinking about dinner, or more accurately, whether he could afford anything better than the standard protein paste from the vending machines, when he heard the voices echoing from around the corner ahead. Loud voices, angry voices, the kind of voices that usually meant trouble for anyone unlucky enough to be nearby. Marcus slowed his pace and listened. The universal translator in his earpiece was struggling with whatever language was being spoken, producing only fragments, not supposed to be here, and terminate the witness, and something that sounded like, for the honor of the hegemony. That last phrase made Marcus's blood run cold. The hegemony. Even down in the forgotten depths of the station, everyone knew that name. The hegemony was the unofficial alliance of the galaxy's oldest and most powerful species, the ones who had been traveling between stars when humanity was still figuring out agriculture. They didn't often concern themselves with the lower levels of space stations, which meant that whatever was happening around that corner was serious. Marcus should have turned around, should have found another route back to the maintenance bay, should have minded his own business like every survival instinct screamed at him to do. But something about the tone of those voices, something about the words "terminate the witness," made him creep forward instead. He left the recycling unit where it was and moved as quietly as possible toward the corner. The voices were clearer now, and his translator was doing better with them. 3 distinct speakers, all using the formal dialect of Vorthak, the trade language of the hegemony's military forces. She saw too much, one was saying. The Queen's location must remain secret until the ceremony. Agreed, came another voice, deeper and more gravelly. A simple waste disposal worker should not have been in that sector. Her presence there proves she is either a spy or simply unlucky. The outcome is the same either way, said the third voice, cold as vacuum. Execute her and dispose of the body. No one will miss another lowborn. Marcus reached the corner and carefully peered around it. What he saw made his heart hammer against his ribs. 3 figures in the black and silver armor of hegemony shock troops stood in a rough semicircle around a 4th figure who was backed against the bulkhead. The 3 soldiers were Vorthak, tall and broad with the characteristic blue-gray skin and bony ridges that ran from their foreheads down to their jawlines. Each carried a military-grade plasma rifle that could punch through station hull plating. But it was the 4th figure that made Marcus forget how to breathe. She was human, young, maybe early 20s, with dark hair that had escaped from what might have been a ponytail, and clothes that looked like they belonged in the station service sections. Her face was streaked with dirt and what might have been tears, but her dark eyes burned with defiance even as she pressed herself against the wall. "I didn't see anything," she was saying, her voice steady despite the obvious terror in her situation. "I was just trying to find my way back to my work assignment. I got lost in the service tunnels." "A convenient story," the leader of the soldiers replied, raising his weapon. "But irrelevant. You have been in the presence of the Queen's retinue. That knowledge cannot be allowed to spread." "I don't know what you're talking about," the woman insisted. "I don't know anything about any queen. I'm just a maintenance worker." The soldier's finger moved toward the trigger of his plasma rifle. "Then you will die as one." Marcus didn't think. Thinking would have reminded him that he was just one human with no weapons facing 3 trained killers in powered armor. Thinking would have reminded him that interfering in hegemony business was a guaranteed death sentence. thinking whatever minded him that he had no idea who this woman was or whether she was telling the truth about being an innocent bystander. Instead, Marcus acted on pure instinct, the same instinct that had made humans uniquely suited for the chaos of space exploration. The same instinct that had driven human soldiers to throw themselves on grenades to save their comrades. The same instinct that had made the galaxy's older species both respect and fear humanity's unpredictable nature. He launched himself around the corner, just as the Vorthak soldier's weapon began to glow with charging energy. "Look out!" Marcus shouted, throwing himself between the woman and the three soldiers just as the first plasma bolt discharged from the rifle. The beam hit Marcus square in the chest, and the world exploded into pain and light. The impact threw him backward into the woman, and both of them crashed against the bulkhead. Marcus felt the searing heat of the plasma burn through his work coveralls and into his skin, but the station's emergency medical systems had kicked in, flooding his bloodstream with pain suppressors and trauma stabilizers through his mandatory health implant. He rolled to his feet, placing himself between the woman and the soldiers, spreading his arms wide to make himself a bigger target. The smell of his own burned flesh filled his nostrils, but the medical implant was keeping him conscious and mobile. "Run," he told the woman without taking his eyes off the soldiers. "When I move, you run." "You fool," the lead soldier snarled, readjusting his aim. "You have only delayed the inevitable. Now you both die." Marcus watched the soldier's finger tighten on the trigger again, calculating distances and angles. The corridor was narrow enough that he could probably reach the nearest soldier before they could get a clean shot, but there were three of them and only one of him. The math didn't work in his favor, but sometimes humans didn't care about math. Marcus charged. He covered the distance to the first soldier in 3 quick steps, tackling the Vorthak around the waist before the alien could bring his weapon to bear. The plasma rifle discharged into the ceiling, sending sparks and molten metal raining down on all of them. Marcus drove his shoulder into the soldier's midsection, using his lower center of gravity to his advantage as he drove the alien backward into his companions. The 3 soldiers went down in a tangle of limbs and armor, but Marcus knew it wouldn't last long. Vorthak were stronger than humans on average, and their armor gave them additional advantages. He had maybe seconds before they sorted themselves out and turned him into vapor. "Run," he shouted again to the woman, hoping she had taken his advice and was already halfway to safety. Instead, she was still there, and she was doing something that made no sense at all. She had pulled what looked like a simple maintenance access card from her pocket and was holding it up where the soldiers could see it. "Stop," she commanded, and her voice had changed completely. Gone was the frightened, pleading tone of a cornered maintenance worker. This voice carried absolute authority, the kind of command presence that made people obey without thinking. The 3 soldiers froze in the process of untangling themselves from Marcus and each other. Even Marcus found himself stopping, looking back at the woman in confusion. She was standing straighter now, and the fear had vanished from her dark eyes, replaced by something that looked like barely controlled fury. The maintenance card in her hand was glowing with soft blue light, displaying symbols that Marcus had never seen before, but that obviously meant something very important to the Vorthak soldiers. "You dare draw weapons in the presence of the Eternal Crown?" she continued, her voice carrying easily down the corridor. "You dare threaten the life of one who acted to protect the rightful ruler of the 14 systems?" The lead soldier had gone very still, staring at the glowing card with what Marcus could only describe as horror. "Impossible," he whispered. You cannot be. I'm exactly who you think I am," the woman said calmly. "And you have just committed treason against the crown by attempting to execute me without trial or tribunal. More importantly, you have threatened the life of one who risked himself to defend me. That is an insult to the crown that cannot be overlooked." Marcus looked back and forth between the woman and the soldiers, his mind struggling to process what was happening. The soldiers were backing away now, their weapons lowered, their body language screaming submission and terror. "Your Majesty," the lead soldier stammered. "We were told our orders were to eliminate a potential security breach. We had no idea." "Your orders," the woman replied coldly, "were were given by someone who does not have the authority to countermand my direct commands. I have been conducting a personal reconnaissance of this station's lower levels to better understand the living conditions of my subjects. Your interference has endangered both my mission and my life." She gestured toward Marcus, who was still trying to wrap his head around the fact that the maintenance worker he had just saved was apparently some kind of royalty. This man risked his life to protect someone he believed to be in danger, asking nothing in return and expecting no reward. His actions honor both his species and the principles upon which the 14 systems were founded. Any harm that comes to him will be considered a personal attack upon the crown. The soldiers were backing away faster now, practically tripping over themselves in their haste to put distance between themselves and what was apparently a very angry queen. "Your Majesty, please forgive this misunderstanding," the leader pleaded. "We will report to our commanders immediately and ensure that proper protocols are followed in the future." "See that you do," she replied, "and see that word of this incident goes no further than your immediate superiors. The Crown's business is not for general consumption." The soldiers hurried away down the corridor, moving faster than Marcus had ever seen powered armor move in a non-combat situation. Within moments, they were gone, leaving Marcus alone with someone who was apparently one of the most powerful individuals in known space. He turned to look at her, noting that she had somehow managed to transform herself back into the appearance of a frightened maintenance worker. The authoritative bearing was gone, replaced once again by the hunched shoulders and nervous expression of someone who belonged in the lower levels of Space Station. "You're really a queen?" Marcus asked, because it seemed like the most important thing to establish right away. She looked at him for a long moment, as if evaluating how much truth she wanted to share. Finally, she nodded. "I am Queen Lorena Vex of the 14 systems, rightful heir to the eternal crown and sovereign ruler of approximately 40 billion sentient beings across a dozen different species," she said matter-of-factly. "And you just saved my life." Marcus sat down heavily on a nearby piece of equipment, the adrenaline of the fight finally wearing off and leaving him feeling shaky. The medical implant was still managing his pain, but he could feel the edges of the plasma burn beginning to assert themselves. "Why are you down here?" he asked. "I mean, if you're a queen, shouldn't you have guards and fancy ships and, I don't know, whatever queens have?" Lorena smiled for the first time since he had met her, and the expression transformed her entire face. She went from looking like a frightened worker to looking like someone who could command fleets and negotiate treaties. "Because sometimes the only way to truly understand your people is to walk among them," she said simply. "I have been touring the galaxy incognito for months, seeing how the 14 systems really function from the ground level. Most of what reaches the palace is filtered through so many layers of bureaucracy and political maneuvering that the truth gets lost entirely." She gestured around them at the dimly lit corridor with its worn paneling and humming machinery. "Down here, I see how the systems I govern actually affect the people who have to live with them. I see which of my policies work and which ones cause suffering I never intended." Marcus nodded slowly. It made sense in a way that surprised him. "And the soldiers? They weren't supposed to know who you are." "They weren't supposed to be here at all," Lorena replied, her smile fading. "I've been very careful to maintain my cover and avoid the sectors where my official retinue is staying. The fact that they found me here suggests that my movements are being monitored by someone who shouldn't have access to that information." She looked down the corridor where the soldiers had disappeared, worry creasing her features. "Someone is tracking me. Marcus. Someone who wants to know where I go and who I talk to. Someone who is willing to order my execution to keep their surveillance secret." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's environmental systems. "You think someone is trying to hurt you?" "I think someone is planning something that requires knowing my exact location and activities at all times," Lorena said grimly. "And I think your intervention just bought me some time to figure out who it is and what they're planning." She looked at him seriously, studying his face. "I owe you a debt, Marcus Chun. You risked your life for a stranger without hesitation, and that is not a small thing. In the royal court, such an act would be rewarded with titles and lands and great ceremony." "But," Marcus prompted, sensing there was more. "But I suspect that what you really need is something more practical than titles, Lorana said. You're hurt. Your actions tonight have almost certainly brought you to the attention of some very dangerous people, and you now know secrets that could get you killed. Marcus hadn't really thought about that part yet. The three soldiers had seen his face, heard his name when Lorana spoke it. Even if she ordered them to stay silent, there was no guarantee that whoever had sent them wouldn't decide that Marcus was a loose end that needed to be tied up. So what happens now? He asked. Lorana was quiet for a moment, thinking. When she spoke again, her voice had taken on the tone of someone making a decision that would change everything. Now, Marcus Chun, you have a choice to make, she said. You can return to your life, and I will do everything in my power to protect you from the consequences of tonight. I will use my influence to ensure your safety, and you will never see me again. She paused, meeting his eyes. Or you can help me figure out who is hunting me and why. It'll be dangerous, and there's a very good chance we'll both end up dead before it's over. But if we succeed, we might prevent something that could destabilize the entire galaxy. Marcus thought about his quiet life in the maintenance sections, his daily routine of waste management and equipment repair. He thought about the safety of invisibility, the comfort of knowing exactly what each day would bring. Then, he thought about the way Lorana had looked when she was backed against the wall, facing death with defiance in her eyes. He thought about the authority in her voice when she protected him from the soldiers, and the genuine concern in her expression when she talked about understanding her people. You're really planning to do this alone? He asked. Hunt down whoever is after you with just what? Your maintenance access card. I have resources, Lorana said, though she didn't elaborate on what those might be. But you're right that I could use help from someone who understands how this station really works. Someone who can move through the lower levels without attracting attention. Someone who has proven that he can be trusted. Marcus stood up, ignoring the protestations from his burned chest. The medical implant was doing its job, but he would need proper treatment soon. All right, he said, but I have conditions. Lorana raised an eyebrow. You're negotiating with a queen? I'm negotiating with someone who needs my help. Marcus corrected. First condition, no more lies. If we're doing this together, I need to know what's really going on. Agreed, Lorana said without hesitation. Second condition, if this gets too dangerous, we find a way to get you to safety, even if it means abandoning the investigation. Lorana looked like she wanted to argue with that one, but eventually nodded. Agreed, though I reserve the right to define what constitutes too dangerous. Third condition, Marcus said, and this was the important one. Whatever happens, we look out for each other. No royal protocols, no class distinctions. We're partners in this, or we're not doing it all. Lorana smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes. You know, Marcus Chun, I think you might be exactly what this investigation needs. She held out her hand, and after a moment, Marcus shook it. Partners, Lorana agreed. Now let's get you to a medical bay and figure out who wants me dead. As they walked down the corridor together, Marcus couldn't help but think that his quiet, invisible life had just become anything but quiet. He had thrown himself in front of a plasma beam to save a stranger, and somehow that simple act of human decency had thrust him into the middle of what sounded like a galactic conspiracy. He should have been terrified. Instead, for the first time in years, Marcus felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The medical bay in subsection C7 was barely worthy of a name. A cramped room with outdated equipment and a single automated treatment pod that looked like it had been salvaged from a decommissioned cargo hauler. But it was private, off the main thoroughfares, and most importantly, it didn't require identification codes that would alert station security to their presence. Marcus gritted his teeth as the treatment pod's mechanical arms worked to repair the plasma burn across his chest. The wound was worse than he had initially thought. The medical implant's pain suppressors had masked the full extent of the damage. According to the pod's diagnostic display, he had third-degree burns across nearly 15% of his torso, along with some internal tissue damage from the plasma's thermal shock. You should be dead, Lorana observed, watching the readouts with clinical interest. A direct hit from a military-grade plasma rifle at that range should have burned straight through you. The coveralls, Marcus explained, wincing as a mechanical probe cleaned dead tissue from the wound. Standard issue for waste management includes basic thermal protection. Not enough to stop a plasma beam, but enough to keep it from killing me instantly. Lucky, Lorana said. No, Marcus corrected. Prepared. There's a difference. Lorana studied him with new interest. You weren't always a waste management worker, were you? Marcus was quiet for a moment, debating how much of his past he wanted to share. But she had promised no more lies, and he figured this should go both ways. Colonial Marines, he said finally. 4th Expeditionary Force. I spent 8 years exploring systems beyond the frontier, establishing human settlements on worlds that hadn't seen intelligent life before. What happened? Lorana asked. Why leave? Marcus watched the mechanical arms working on his chest, remembering other medical bays, other wounds, other questions about choices he had made. We found a world. Kepler, 442b. Beautiful place. Earth-like atmosphere, plenty of water, no intelligent native life. Perfect for colonization. He paused as the treatment pod injected something into his bloodstream that made the pain recede further. Except there was intelligent life. Just not obviously so. The forests themselves were sentient, a collective consciousness that had been evolving for millions of years. We didn't realize it until after we had started clearing land for the first settlements. Lorana was very still, listening. I was the one who figured it out, Marcus continued. I noticed patterns in how the trees grew, how they responded to our presence. I tried to report it, tried to get the mission commanders to halt the clearing operations until we could study the situation more carefully. They refused. They said that trees weren't people, no matter how smart they might be. The colonization mission had cost too much to abandon over what they called botanical curiosities. Marcus's voice carried old anger, carefully controlled. So I did what I thought was right. I sabotaged the clearing equipment and transmitted our findings to the Galactic Council. That must have made you popular with your commanders. Popular enough to earn a dishonorable discharge and a permanent ban from military service, Marcus said. The colonization mission was canceled, Kepler 442b was designated a protected world, and I was blacklisted from pretty much every job that required security clearance. So you ended up here, managing waste disposal. So I ended up here, Marcus confirmed. It's honest work, and nobody asks too many questions about your past as long as you show up on time and do the job. The treatment pod chimed softly, indicating that the initial repairs were complete. Marcus sat up carefully, testing his range of motion. The skin across his chest was tender and would be sensitive for weeks, but the pain was manageable now. You saved an entire sentient species, Lorana said quietly, and your reward was exile and disgrace. I did what was right, Marcus replied simply. Sometimes that's enough. Lorana looked at him with something that might have been admiration. No wonder you threw yourself in front of that plasma beam without hesitation. Self-sacrifice for the greater good seems to be a pattern with you. What about you? Marcus asked, pulling his shirt back on over the fresh bandages. How does someone end up queen of 14 star systems while still young enough to pass for a maintenance worker? Inheritance, Lorana said with a bitter smile. My parents died in a transport accident when I was 16. One day, I was a sheltered princess studying poetry and interstellar law. The next, I was the sole ruler of 40 billion people I had never met. She moved to the small viewport that looked out into the station's superstructure, watching ships dock and depart in the distance. Everyone told me what a great tragedy it was, how sorry they were for my loss. But the truth is, I barely knew my parents. They were always traveling, always negotiating treaties or resolving disputes or attending state functions. I was raised by tutors and servants and protocol officers. That must have been lonely, Marcus said. Lonelier than you can imagine, Lorana agreed. Do you know what it's like to be surrounded by people every moment of your life, but never have a single person who sees you as anything other than a title? Everyone wants something from a queen. Everyone has an agenda. Every conversation is really about what the other person hopes to gain from your attention. She turned away from the viewport to face him. That's why these reconnaissance missions matter so much to me. When I'm disguised as a maintenance worker or a cargo handler or a food service employee, people talk to me like I'm actually human. They share their real problems, their genuine concerns. They don't perform for me or try to impress me or tell me what they think I want to hear. And that's how you ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time tonight. I was investigating reports of unusual activity in the lower service sectors, Lorana said. Workers disappearing from their shifts, strange equipment being moved through restricted areas, security patrols where there aren't supposed to be security patrols. I thought I was tracking some kind of smuggling operation. Marcus frowned. What kind of workers are disappearing? Maintenance staff, mostly. People who have access to the station's infrastructure, but low enough security clearance that their absences wouldn't be noticed immediately. Lorana pulled a small datapad from her pocket and called up a file. 17 people in the last month. All human or from species that look enough like humans to be easily mistaken. That's specific, Marcus said, studying the names and photos on the screen. He recognized a few faces, people he had seen in the mess halls or working late shifts in adjacent sectors. Any connection besides their jobs? Not that I could determine, Lorana replied. Different departments, different shifts, different living quarters. The only common factor is their access level and their general appearance. Marcus thought about that for a moment. What if it's not about what they know, but about what they look like? You said people who could pass for human. What if someone is collecting people who could impersonate specific individuals? Lorana's eyes widened slightly. That's actually a terrifying possibility. If someone wanted to infiltrate human-controlled facilities or organizations, having a collection of people who could pass for specific humans would be incredibly valuable. Or if someone wanted to replace specific humans without anyone noticing, Marcus added grimly. They looked at each other in silence for a moment, both contemplating the implications of that possibility. Finally, Lorana spoke. There's something else, she said. Something I didn't mention before. The soldiers who found me tonight, they weren't supposed to know where I was. My presence on this station is classified at the highest levels. Only a handful of people in my inner circle know I'm here, and fewer still know my exact itinerary. You think someone close to you sold you out? I think someone close to me is working with whoever is behind these disappearances, Lorana said, and I think they wanted me eliminated before I could discover what they're really planning. Marcus felt a chill of understanding. They weren't just trying to kill a witness. They were trying to kill the Queen. Which means this isn't just a smuggling operation or even a kidnapping ring, Lorana concluded. This is something much bigger. Something that requires the Queen to be permanently removed from the equation. Rebellion, Marcus suggested. Or worse, Lorana said. What if someone is planning to replace me? If they have access to my schedule and my security protocols, if they've been collecting people who can impersonate humans, what if the plan is to have someone take my place? The implications of that possibility hung in the air between them like a toxic cloud. An imposter on the throne of the 14 systems could destabilize the entire galactic balance of power. The economic and military alliances that kept the peace between dozens of species could collapse overnight. We need more information, Marcus said finally. And we need it fast. Agreed, Lorana said. But we have to be careful. If my inner circle has been compromised, I can't trust any of my usual resources. We're on our own. Marcus nodded, then had a thought. Maybe not completely on our own. I might know someone who can help. Ooh, another exile, Marcus said. Someone who has even less love for authority than I do, but who knows more about this station's hidden systems than almost anyone alive. Lorana raised an eyebrow. Should I ask how you know someone like that? Probably better not to, Marcus replied. But if anyone can help us track down what's happening in the restricted areas without alerting whoever is monitoring your movements, it's her. Her. Dr. Zura Okafor, Marcus said, former xenobiologist for the Galactic Research Consortium. She was kicked out for conducting unauthorized experiments on sentient species. Now she runs an underground clinic in the station's forgotten sectors, treating people who can't afford legitimate medical care. Unauthorized experiments on sentient species sounds like someone we should be avoiding, not recruiting, Lorana pointed out. The unauthorized experiments were testing treatments for degenerative neural conditions that were killing her patients, Marcus explained. The consortium wouldn't approve the research because the test subjects were from species they considered expendable. Zara decided that ethics mattered more than bureaucracy. Another exile for doing what she thought was right. Exactly, Marcus said. And if she's still running her clinic, she'll have access to surveillance systems and data networks that your people probably don't even know exist. The Undercity has its own infrastructure, invisible to station security. Lorana considered this for a moment. How do we find her? We follow the maintenance tunnels down to the old mining levels, Marcus said. The parts of the station that were built first when Nexus was just an asteroid mining operation. Before it became a major trade hub, before the diplomatic quarters, and The luxury sectors were added on top. Sounds dangerous. It is, Marcus admitted. The atmosphere processing down, there is spotty, the gravity generators are unreliable, and some of the tunnels haven't been mapped in decades. But it's also where you go when you don't want to be found. Perfect, Lorena said with a grim smile. Lead the way. They gathered what supplies they could from the medical bay, emergency oxygen canisters, portable lighting, basic tools, and set out for the deeper levels of the station. Marcus led them through a maze of service corridors and maintenance shafts, following routes he had learned during his years of waste management work. As they descended, the familiar sounds of the upper levels faded away. The constant hum of air recyclers and the distant rumble of ship traffic gave way to older sounds. The deep vibration of the original mining equipment, the echo of water dripping through ancient seals, the occasional groan of metal stressed beyond its design limits. How far down are we going? Lorena asked as they climbed down another maintenance ladder. Deep enough that the station's central computer stops tracking individual movements, Marcus replied. Down here, you're invisible unless someone is specifically looking for you. They reached a level that Marcus recognized from his early days on the station, when he had been ambitious enough to explore the forgotten corners of his new home. The corridors here were narrower, carved from the original asteroid rather than built with modular components. The walls showed tool marks from the mining equipment that had hollowed out these spaces decades ago. This way, Marcus said, leading them down a passage that curved to follow the asteroid's natural contours. Zara's clinic is in the old processing center, where they used to separate different types of ore. They walked in companionable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Marcus found himself glancing at Lorena periodically, still struggling to reconcile her appearance with her true identity. She moved like someone accustomed to physical labor, stepping carefully around obstacles and ducking under low-hanging pipes without complaint. Whatever kind of education royal tutors provided, it apparently included practical skills. Marcus, Lorena said suddenly, stopping in the middle of the corridor. What is it? She was looking at something ahead of them, her expression troubled. Marcus followed her gaze and felt his stomach drop. There were lights in the distance. Moving lights, like handheld illuminators carried by people walking toward them. And faintly, very faintly, he could hear voices echoing through the tunnel system. They found us, Lorena said quietly. Marcus listened carefully, trying to determine how many people were approaching and how far away they might be. The acoustics in the old mining tunnels made it difficult to judge distances accurately, but it sounded like at least 3 or 4 individuals, moving systematically through the passages. This way, Marcus whispered, grabbing Lorena's arm and pulling her toward a side passage that branched off to their left. There's another route to Zara's clinic, but it's more dangerous. They moved as quickly as they could through the narrow passage, trying to put distance between themselves and their pursuers without making noise that would give away their location. Behind them, the voices grew louder, and Marcus could make out fragments of conversation in what sounded like the same Vorthack military dialect they had heard earlier. How did they track us? Lorena asked as they reached a junction of 3 different passages. Same way they found you the first time, Marcus replied grimly. Someone is feeding them information about your movements. Someone who knows the station well enough to predict where you might go. They chose the middle passage, which sloped sharply downward into the deeper levels of the original mining operation. The air here was thinner and carried a metallic taste that spoke of inadequate atmospheric processing. Marcus handed Lorena one of the emergency oxygen canisters. Just in case, he said. The passage opened into a vast chamber that had once been the main processing center for the asteroid's mineral wealth. Ancient conveyor systems stretched across the space like mechanical spiderwebs, and enormous hoppers and sorting machines loomed in the shadows. Emergency lighting provided minimal illumination, casting strange patterns across the corroded surfaces. Zara's clinic is on the far side, Marcus said, pointing across the chamber. We can use the old conveyor system to stay off the floor level, make it harder for them to track us. They climbed onto one of the conveyor belts and began making their way across the chamber, moving from belt to belt when necessary to avoid gaps or damaged sections. The metal groaned under their weight, but the construction was solid enough to support them. They were halfway across when the lights appeared at the chamber's entrance. Marcus and Lorana froze, pressing themselves flat against the conveyor belt and hoping the shadows would hide them from view. The lights swept back and forth across the chamber, searching methodically. Spread out, came a voice from the entrance. Check all possible routes through this area. They cannot have gone far. The lights separated, moving in different directions around the perimeter of the chamber. Marcus counted at least 5 distinct sources, which meant they were outnumbered and outgunned. Their only advantage was knowledge of the terrain. Can you make it to that sorting platform? Marcus whispered to Lorana, pointing to a structure about 20 meters away. She nodded, and they began moving again, crawling along the conveyor belt toward the platform. Behind them, the searchlights continued their methodical sweep, but the searchers were being careful and thorough rather than fast. They reached the sorting platform just as one of the lights began to track in their direction. Marcus pulled Lorana down behind the bulk of a sorting machine, both of them holding their breath as the light passed over their hiding spot. There's an access tunnel on the other side of this platform, Marcus whispered. It leads directly to the clinic, but we'll be exposed for about 10 seconds while we cross to it. Can we create a distraction? Lorana asked. Marcus looked around the platform, taking inventory of available options. The old sorting machinery was still connected to power systems, though it hadn't been active in decades. If he could get it running. Wait here, he told Lorana, then crawled to the platform's control panel. The interface was ancient, but the basic principles were the same as modern equipment. Marcus found the main power coupling and carefully activated the sorting system. Ancient motors groaned to life, and the conveyor belts began moving for the first time in years. The sudden noise and movement drew the attention of all the searchers, their lights converging on different parts of the chamber as they tried to locate the source of the disturbance. In the confusion, Marcus and Lorana sprinted across the platform to the access tunnel, diving into its concealment just as the lights began to sweep in their direction again. They crawled through the tunnel for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, finally emerging into a smaller chamber that had been converted into something resembling a medical facility. Improvised surgical lighting hung from the ceiling, and various pieces of medical equipment, some recognizable, some not, were arranged around makeshift examination tables. Well, came a voice from the shadows. Marcus Chun, I was wondering when you'd find your way down to my little corner of the universe. A woman stepped into the light, and Marcus smiled for the first time in hours. Dr. Zura Okafor looked exactly as he remembered her, tall and lean with skin the color of polished ebony and eyes that seemed to see everything at once. Her dark hair was streaked with premature gray, and her clothes were a practical mixture of medical scrubs and maintenance coveralls. Hello, Zura, Marcus said. We need your help. Dr. Zura Okafor studied her unexpected visitors with a clinical detachment that had made her both a brilliant scientist and a dangerous enemy of bureaucracy. Her gaze lingered on Lorana for a long moment before switching to Marcus. You bring me interesting company, Marcus, she said, her accent carrying traces of the Earth colonies where she had grown up. And judging by the way you came through my emergency entrance instead of the front door, I'm guessing this isn't a social call. We're being hunted, Marcus said without preamble. Military forces, probably hegemony, definitely well-equipped and well-informed. They've been tracking us through the station. And why would hegemony forces be interested in a waste management worker and his... Zara looked at Lorana again. Friend? Lorana stepped forward, her posture straightening into something that Marcus was beginning to recognize as her true bearing. Because I am Queen Lorana Vex of the 14 systems, and someone very close to me is trying to have me killed. Zara's expression didn't change, but Marcus noticed her hand move almost imperceptibly towards something hidden beneath her medical coat. Interesting claim, she said calmly. Got any proof of that? Lorana pulled out the same access card she had shown the soldiers earlier. It glowed with the same blue light, displaying symbols that were clearly meaningful to anyone with knowledge of galactic political structures. Impressive forgery, Zara said, still not moving. But not impossible to fake. Ask me something only the Queen would know, Lorana challenged. Zara considered this for a moment. The Kalani Accords of 2387. What was the real reason the negotiations failed? The Kalani delegation walked out because Ambassador Thorne accused them of practicing ritual cannibalism during their religious ceremonies. Lorana replied immediately. Which they do, but it's considered extremely poor diplomatic protocol to mention it directly. The official record states that they left due to irreconcilable cultural differences. Zara's hand moved away from whatever weapon she had been reaching for. Well, that's either the real queen or someone with access to some very classified diplomatic records. It's the real queen, Marcus confirmed. I saw her face down 3 hegemony shock troops like she was scolding children for tracking mud on the carpet. And now you're both down here asking for help from a disgraced xenobiologist, Zara said. This should be interesting. What kind of help are you looking for? Information, Lorana said. Someone in my inner circle is feeding intelligence to hostile forces. Workers have been disappearing from this station, and I believe it's connected to a plot against me personally. How many workers? Zara asked, suddenly serious. 17 in the last month, Marcus replied. All human or near-human appearance, all with maintenance access to station infrastructure. Zara was quiet for a moment, then moved to a wall covered with what looked like surveillance monitors. Most showed empty corridors or storage areas, but a few displayed what were clearly living spaces, small rooms where people were reading or sleeping or going about their daily routines. 18, she said finally. What? Lorana asked. 18 workers have disappeared, Zara clarified. You missed one. Jana Kowalski, environmental systems specialist, vanished 3 days ago from sublevel C-12. How do you know that? Marcus asked. Because Jana was one of my patients, Zara replied. She'd been coming here for treatment for chronic pain caused by an old injury that station medical wouldn't properly address. When she missed her appointment and didn't respond to messages, I started asking questions. She turned to face them fully. You want to know what else I found out? Every single one of those missing workers had been here for treatment at some point in the last 6 months. Every single one. Marcus felt a chill of understanding. They weren't taken randomly. Someone was targeting your patients specifically, which means someone has been monitoring my clinic, Zara said grimly. Someone who knows who comes here and why. That's not possible, Lorana said. This facility isn't on any official station records. How could anyone be conducting surveillance down here? Zara smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. Your Majesty, with all due respect, you don't understand how this station really works. The official records are just the surface layer. Down here in the Undercity, we have our own networks, our own communication systems, our own way of keeping track of what matters. She gestured to the monitors on the wall. These aren't connected to station security. They're part of a network that the forgotten people of Nexus Station built themselves. Workers who needed medical care they couldn't afford, refugees waiting for transport, people who fell through the cracks of the official systems. A shadow society, Marcus said with understanding. More than that, Zara replied. A parallel society. We have our own doctors, our own mechanics, our own information brokers. We have people working in every department of this station, from waste management to diplomatic services. She moved to another wall display, this one showing what looked like organizational charts and communication trees. And recently, someone has been trying very hard to infiltrate our network. Someone with resources and patience and a very specific agenda. Show me, Lorana commanded, and Marcus heard the royal authority in her voice again. Zara called up a series of files on her main display. It started about 4 months ago. New people showing up, claiming to be refugees or workers down on their luck. They asked the right questions, had convincing stories, seemed genuine enough. But they were all gathering the same type of information. What kind of information? Marcus asked. Personnel records, work schedules, access codes for restricted areas, and, most importantly, information about anyone who had regular contact with off-world diplomatic missions. The pieces began falling into place in Marcus's mind. They were building a database of potential targets, people they could replace or impersonate. Exactly, Zara confirmed. And when they had identified their targets, they started taking them, quietly, carefully, one at a time, so that the disappearances wouldn't be noticed immediately. But why target your patients specifically? Lorana asked. Because my patients are people who can't go to official channels for help, Zara explained. Workers with injuries they can't report, refugees with questionable documentation, people who have to stay invisible to stay alive. If someone like that disappears, who's going to file a missing person report? No one, Marcus said, understanding the horrible efficiency of the plan. And if you need test subjects for some kind of identity replacement process, you want people who won't be missed right away, Lorana added, her voice grim. Zara nodded. I've been tracking the infiltration attempts, trying to figure out who's behind them. What I found was disturbing. She brought up another file, this one showing communication intercepts and financial records. The funding is coming from multiple sources, but they all trace back to a single coordination point. Someone with access to both hegemony military resources and significant private wealth. Someone in my inner circle, Lorana said quietly. Someone with the authority to deploy shock troops and the money to fund an extended covert operation, Zara agreed. The question is, what's the endgame? What are they planning to do with all these missing people? Before anyone could answer, a new alarm began chiming softly from Zara's monitoring systems. She moved quickly to check the displays, her expression growing increasingly concerned. We have a problem, she announced. Multiple armed groups moving through the lower levels. They're not searching randomly anymore. They're moving with specific purpose toward known entrances to the Undercity network. How many groups? Marcus asked. At least 6, probably more, Zara replied, checking additional monitors. And they're well coordinated. This isn't a search operation, it's a siege. Lorana moved to look at the displays herself. They're trying to cut off all escape routes from this area. They know we're here, which means they have real-time intelligence on our movements, Marcus said. Someone is tracking us with technology we can't detect. Or someone is feeding them information directly, Zara added. She looked at Lorana with sudden suspicion. How many people know you're on this station? 6, Lorana replied without hesitation. My personal aide, my chief of security, my communications officer, my diplomatic liaison, my intelligence coordinator, and my transportation commander. And how many of them know you're conducting these undercover reconnaissance missions? Lorana was quiet for a moment. All of them, she admitted. I couldn't maintain the operation without their cooperation. Then, we have 6 suspects, Marcus said. Question is, how do we figure out which one is the traitor? I might have an idea about that, Zara said slowly. But first, we need to get out of here. My clinic is about to be overrun, and whatever information I've collected won't do us any good if we're all dead. She moved to a seemingly blank wall and pressed a sequence of hidden controls. A section of the wall slid aside, revealing a passage that looked like it had been carved directly from the asteroid's rock. Emergency exit, she explained, leads to the old mining tunnels on the far side of the processing center. From there, we can reach the abandoned residential sectors. What about your equipment? Your patients? Marcus asked. The equipment can be replaced, Zara said, quickly gathering essential medical supplies and data storage devices. Most of my patients know to scatter when the alarm sounds. It's not the first time we've had to abandon a clinic. As if summoned by her words, several figures emerged from concealed alcoves and hidden rooms throughout the facility. Marcus realized that what he had thought was Zara's private clinic was actually a much larger operation, with multiple staff members and more sophisticated security measures than he had initially noticed. Dr. Okafor, one of them called out, a young woman who might have been human or from any of several near-human species. Perimeter teams report multiple breach attempts at all primary access points. Estimate 5 minutes before they reach the main facility. Initiate evacuation protocol 7, Zara replied calmly. All medical personnel to secondary facilities, all data to the distributed backup network. I want this place clean before they get here. Marcus watched in amazement as the facility transformed around them. Equipment was quickly disassembled and moved through hidden passages. Computer systems were wiped and portable drives secured, and within minutes the space looked like nothing more than an abandoned section of the old mining operation. Impressive, Lorana said, clearly thinking the same thing. Survival, Zara corrected. When you operate outside official channels, you learn to be very good at disappearing quickly. They followed her through the emergency passage, moving as fast as they dared through the narrow tunnel. Behind them, Marcus could hear the distant sounds of the clinic being systematically searched by their pursuers. The tunnel opened into a section of the station that Marcus had never seen before. The architecture was older even than the mining levels, with walls that showed signs of being hand-carved rather than cut by machinery. Emergency lighting provided minimal illumination, casting long shadows that seemed to move with their passage. "Where are we?" Lorana asked. "The original settlement," Zara explained. "This is where the first miners lived when Nexus Station was just an asteroid with some interesting mineral deposits. Before the trade routes were established, before the diplomatic corridor was built, before any of the modern infrastructure. They walked through what had once been living quarters and common areas, now empty and silent. The spaces were small and utilitarian, designed for functionality rather than comfort. Marcus could imagine the miners who had lived here, working dangerous shifts in the asteroid's depths and returning to these cramped but safe spaces to rest. It's been abandoned for decades, Zara continued. Officially, these sections don't exist anymore, but they're perfect for people who need to stay hidden. They reached what had once been the settlement's central gathering area, a larger space with multiple passages leading off in different directions. Zara led them to what looked like a communications center, with arrays of monitoring equipment and data displays that were clearly more sophisticated than anything that should exist in an abandoned section of the station. "Welcome to the real nerve center of the Undercity," she announced. The displays showed surveillance feeds from throughout Nexus Station, including areas that Marcus was certain were supposed to be secure. Communication channels scrolled past, showing messages in dozens of different languages and species writing systems. And, most impressive of all, real-time tracking displays showed the movements of individuals throughout the station. "How is this possible?" Lorana asked, staring at the displays. 20 years of careful work," Zara replied. "When you treat people from every department and every security level of the station, you end up with a very extensive network of allies. A favor here, a small modification there. Access codes shared in gratitude for medical care that saves someone's life. This is what you meant about a parallel society," Marcus realized. "This is how the forgotten people of the galaxy survive," Zara confirmed. "By creating our own systems when the official ones fail us." She moved to a central console and began calling up specific files. "And this is how we're going to figure out who's trying to kill your queen." The display showed a detailed breakdown of communication traffic to and from the diplomatic corridor of Nexus Station over the last several months. Specific patterns were highlighted in different colors, showing regular transmissions, anomalous spikes in activity, and unauthorized communications channels. "I've been monitoring communications between your ship and external contacts," Zara explained to Lorana. "Someone on your staff has been sending regular reports to an outside party using encrypted channels that aren't part of your official diplomatic protocols." "Show me," Lorana commanded. Zara highlighted a specific communication pattern. "The transmissions happen at regular intervals, always from the same source terminal, always using the same encryption protocol. But the destination addresses change each time, which suggests a sophisticated distribution network." "Can you trace the source terminal?" Marcus asked. "Already did," Zara replied. "The signals are originating from the personal communications suite assigned to your diplomatic liaison, Ambassador Thorne." Lorana went very still. "That's impossible. Thorne has served my family for 20 years. He was my father's most trusted advisor." "The communications data doesn't lie," Zara said gently, "unless someone else has been using his personal terminal without his knowledge." "The dates," Lorana said, studying the display. "Show me the dates of these transmissions." Zara highlighted the temporal data, and Lorana's face went pale. "Those are the exact times I submitted my itinerary updates for this reconnaissance mission. Every change in my schedule, every new location I planned to visit, someone was reporting it immediately. Which explains how those soldiers found you in the first place," Marcus said, "and how our pursuers have been tracking us through the station." "But why would Thorne betray me?" Lorana asked, and for the first time since Marcus had met her, she sounded more like a confused young woman than a galactic ruler. What could anyone offer him that would make him turn against everything he's sworn to protect? Before anyone could answer, new alarms began chiming from Zara's monitoring systems. The displays showed multiple groups of armed figures converging on their location from several different directions. "They found us again," Zara announced grimly. "And this time, they're coming from directions that should be impossible. Someone is guiding them through passages that aren't on any official maps. Passages you showed them? Marcus asked, the implications becoming clear. Passages that only someone with intimate knowledge of the Undercity network could navigate, Zara confirmed. Someone who has been here before. Lorana was staring at the tactical display with growing understanding. They're not just hunting us. They're destroying the entire network. Every safe house, every hidden clinic, every refuge that the forgotten people have built. Why? Marcus asked. Because once they eliminate me and put their puppet on the throne, they can't afford to have an underground network that operates outside official control, Lorana said. They need total information dominance. Then, we need to make sure they don't succeed, Zara said firmly. And I think I know how. She moved to another console and began rapidly inputting commands. I've been maintaining detailed records of all the infiltration attempts, all the missing persons, all the unauthorized communications. Everything we need to prove what's been happening and who's responsible. Where are you sending it? Lorana asked. Everywhere, Zara replied with grim satisfaction. Every news service, every diplomatic mission, every government office in the 14 systems. I'm broadcasting it on open frequencies on official channels through private networks and via the underground information network. The displays lit up as data began streaming out through dozens of different communication channels. Within minutes, the information would be in the hands of journalists, government officials, and intelligence agencies throughout the galaxy. They can kill us, Zara said calmly, but they can't stop the truth from getting out. And once people know what's been happening, their conspiracy becomes much more difficult to maintain. Assuming we survive long enough for the information to matter, Marcus pointed out, watching the tactical displays as their pursuers closed in on their location. Well, Zara said, checking her weapon and gathering the last of her essential equipment, I guess we're about to find out how good we really are at staying alive. The sounds of their pursuers grew louder, echoing through the abandoned passages as armed figures systematically searched every possible hiding place. Marcus, Lorana, and Zara stood together in the communication center, surrounded by evidence of conspiracy and rebellion, knowing that the next few minutes would determine not just their own fate, but the future of the entire galactic political order. Any suggestions on our next move? Marcus asked. Lorana smiled, and for the first time, Marcus saw something truly dangerous in her expression. Actually, yes. I think it's time to stop running and start fighting back. The abandoned communication center had become their fortress, and Marcus was beginning to understand why humanity had earned such a complex reputation in galactic politics. While other species might have chosen diplomacy or surrender when faced with overwhelming odds, humans had an unfortunate tendency to become more dangerous when cornered. Tell me about the station's central computer core, Lorana said to Zara as they prepared for what was looking like their final stand. Level 15, Central Tower, Zara replied, checking the power cells in her medical scanner, which Marcus had noticed could also function as a very effective electromagnetic pulse weapon. Why? Because if we're going to die down here, I want to make sure we take their entire operation with us, Lorana said calmly. And the best way to do that is to broadcast my royal authentication codes and declare a formal state of rebellion against the crown. Marcus looked at her in shock. You want to declare war on yourself? I want to create a legal framework that allows my loyal forces to act without being accused of treason, Lorana explained. If I formally declare that imposters are operating in my name, any orders coming from my official channels become automatically suspect. That's actually brilliant, Zara said with admiration. It creates legal chaos that makes their puppet government impossible to maintain. It also means that every decision has to be verified through independent channels, Lorana continued. No more rubber stamping orders because they appear to come from the Queen. Every military deployment, every policy change, every diplomatic agreement has to be individually authenticated, which buys time for your real allies to figure out what's happening and mount a response, Marcus concluded. Exactly. But it only works if I can get to a terminal with sufficient authority to broadcast to the entire 14 systems network. Zara studied her tactical displays, watching their pursuers move systematically through the abandoned sections. Getting to level 15 is going to be interesting. We have at least 20 hostiles between us and the central lifts, and they've definitely called for reinforcements. What about the old mining shafts? Marcus suggested. Do any of them connect to the central tower? Not directly, Zara replied. But there are maintenance passages that run parallel to the main structural supports. If we can reach Shaft 7, there's a service tunnel that goes all the way up to level 12. From there, it's only 3 levels to the computer core. How heavily guarded are those passages likely to be? Lorena asked. Depends on how much they know about the station's original architecture, Zara said. If they're relying on modern schematics, they might not even know the passages exist. Marcus was studying the tactical display when something caught his attention. There's something wrong with their movement pattern, he said. Look at the way they're positioning themselves. The others gathered around the display as Marcus highlighted the positions of their pursuers. They're not trying to capture us alive anymore. This is a termination pattern designed to eliminate all witnesses in this area, which means they've decided that stealth is no longer their primary concern, Lorena observed grimly. They're ready to move to the next phase of their plan. Or they're panicking because Zara's data broadcast is forcing them to accelerate their timeline, Marcus suggested. Either way, it means we don't have much time, Zara said. She gathered the last of her equipment and moved toward a concealed passage in the rear of the communication center. If we're going to reach the computer core, we need to move now. They slipped through the hidden passage just as the sounds of their pursuers reached the communication center. Marcus could hear voices behind them, speaking in multiple languages as the search teams coordinated their sweep of the area. The passage led them deeper into the original mining operations, through tunnels that had been carved from the asteroid's rock using primitive equipment. The walls showed tool marks and blast patterns from the early mining efforts, and the air carried the faint smell of ancient explosives and metal dust. This way, Zara whispered, leading them through a maze of intersecting tunnels. Shaft 7 is about 200 meters ahead. They moved as quietly as possible, but the tunnels amplified every sound. Their footsteps echoed off the rock walls, and their breathing seemed unnaturally loud in the confined space. Marcus found himself listening for pursuit, waiting for the moment when their hunters would discover their escape route. They reached Shaft 7 without incident, but what they found there made all of them stop short. The shaft was not empty. Bodies were stacked along the walls like cordwood, dozens of them, all human or near human in appearance. Some wore the uniforms of station maintenance workers, others the simple clothes of refugees or off-duty personnel. All showed signs of having died from precise medical procedures rather than violence. The missing workers, Lorena said quietly. And more, Zara added, moving carefully among the bodies with her medical scanner active. Some of these people have been here for weeks, maybe months. Marcus knelt beside one of the bodies, a young woman who might have been a communications technician based on her uniform. Her face was peaceful, as if she had simply gone to sleep, but there were surgical marks near her temples and at the base of her skull. Neural extraction, Zara said, reading her scanner results. Someone has been systematically harvesting memories and personality patterns from these people. The implications of that discovery hit all 3 of them simultaneously. This wasn't just identity theft, it was something far more sophisticated and terrifying. They're not just replacing people, Marcus said with growing horror. They're copying them, creating perfect replicas with all of their memories and behaviors intact. Which means the puppet they plan to put on the throne won't be some amateur actor trying to impersonate me, Lorena said. It will be a perfect duplicate with all of my memories, all of my knowledge, all of my personal relationships. Everyone who matters to you would accept the duplicate as genuine, Zara confirmed. Family, friends, advisors, lovers. No one would have any reason to suspect that you had been replaced. Except for the people who created the duplicate, Marcus pointed out. They would have ultimate control over the most powerful person in the galaxy. They stood in silence for a moment, contemplating the scope of the conspiracy they had uncovered. This wasn't just about eliminating a troublesome queen. It was about creating a puppet ruler who could control the 14 systems without anyone realizing that control had changed hands. The service tunnel, Zara said finally, pointing to a passage that led upward from the shaft. We still need to reach the computer core. They climbed through the service tunnel, leaving the chamber of horrors behind them. The tunnel was narrow and steep, clearly designed for maintenance access rather than regular use. Emergency lighting provided minimal illumination, and they had to move in single file. As they climbed, Marcus found himself thinking about the implications of what they had discovered. If the conspiracy had the technology to create perfect duplicates of people, how many others had already been replaced? How long had this been going on? Were there duplicates already in positions of power throughout the galaxy? Marcus, Lorana said from behind him, can I ask you something? Sure. Why did you really leave the Colonial Marines? The official story about sabotaging equipment to protect a sentient forest. That's true, but it's not the whole truth, is it? Marcus was quiet for a moment, concentrating on the climb. Finally, he spoke. The world we found, Kepler, 442b. The four's consciousness wasn't just sentient, it was ancient. Millions of years old, with memories that went back to when the galaxy was young. It knew things about the origins of intelligent life, about the connections between different species, about the real history of galactic civilization. What kind of things? Things that certain people didn't want to become public knowledge, Marcus said grimly. When I reported my findings, I wasn't just told to ignore the forest's sentience. I was told that the information I had gathered was classified at the highest levels and that anyone who tried to share would be considered a threat to galactic security. You were ordered to suppress evidence of an ancient intelligence. I was ordered to help destroy it, Marcus said. The colonization mission wasn't just about establishing human settlements. It was about eliminating a source of information that could destabilize the current political order. Lorana was quiet for a moment. The people who gave you those orders, do you think they might be connected to what's happening now? I think there are forces at work in this galaxy that are much older and much more dangerous than most people realize, Marcus replied. And I think the conspiracy we've stumbled into is just one part of something much larger. They reached the top of the service tunnel and emerged onto level 12 of the central tower. The architecture here was modern and familiar with the standard gray paneling and artificial lighting that Marcus associated with the station's upper levels. Computer core is 3 levels up, Zara said, checking her scanner for signs of security presence. But we're going to have to use the main lifts. The service tunnels don't go any higher. How many guards? Lorana asked. Unknown, Zara replied. But there's definitely increased security activity on all the upper levels. Someone is taking the threat to the computer core very seriously. They made their way through the maintenance areas of level 12, avoiding the main corridors where possible. The level housed most of the station's administrative offices, and even during off-shift hours there was usually some activity. Tonight, however, the passages were eerily quiet. Too quiet, Marcus observed as they reached the lift access area. Agreed, Zara said. Either everyone has been evacuated, or we're walking into a trap, Lorana finished. The lift access area was a large open space with multiple elevator banks serving different sections of the tower. Emergency lighting was active, but the main illumination systems were offline. The space was filled with shadows that could hide any number of hostile forces. Motion sensors, Zara announced, reading her scanner. At least 6 individuals concealed in this area, plus automated defenses that weren't here during my last reconnaissance. They're expecting us, Marcus said. Good, Lorana replied. And Marcus heard something in her voice that reminded him that she was not just a queen, but a queen whose people had survived and thrived in a galaxy full of hostile forces. I was getting tired of running anyway. She stepped into the open area, making no attempt to conceal herself. I am Queen Lorana Vex of the 14 systems, she called out, her voice carrying clearly through the space. I demand to know by what authority you dare to impede the movement of the sovereign ruler of this territory. The response came in the form of plasma fire from multiple directions. But Marcus and Zara had been expecting that, and they were already moving. Marcus dove to one side, rolling behind a structural pillar, while Zara activated some kind of personal shield generator that deflected the incoming energy beams. Lorana, meanwhile, did something that Marcus hadn't expected. Instead of taking cover, she began speaking in a language he didn't recognize, her voice taking on a resonant quality that seemed to vibrate through the station's structure itself. The automated defense systems began shutting down one by one. Royal override codes, Lorana explained, continuing to speak in what Marcus now realized was some kind of ancient administrative language. Every system in 14 systems territory has hardwired loyalty protocols that respond to the monarch's direct commands. That's why they wanted to replace you instead of just killing you, Marcus said with sudden understanding. A duplicate would have access to those same override codes, which is why we need to make sure they never get the chance to use them, Lorana replied grimly. The hostile forces in the area had been momentarily confused by the shutdown of their automated support systems, but they were regrouping quickly. Marcus counted at least 8 distinct positions, all with clear lines of fire to the lift access points. Zara, he called out, how long do you need to override the lift security? 30 seconds if I can reach the control panel, she replied. Lorana, can you keep talking to the station systems? Maybe convince them that our attackers are the real threat. Already working on it, Lorana said, her voice taking on new authority as she spoke in the ancient language. Throughout the tower, Marcus could hear the sounds of security systems activating and targeting systems coming online. Attention all hostile forces, came an amplified voice from the station's public address system, speaking in Lorana's voice, but with the formal cadence of a computer #the hook that changes everything in the vast expanse of the galaxy, where 1,000 alien species bow before the might of advanced technology and ancient bloodlines. One human garbage collector is about to discover that sometimes the most powerful person in the universe looks exactly like someone who needs saving. When Marcus Chun throws himself between a deadly plasma beam and a terrified young woman in a back alley of the space station's lower levels, he thinks he's just doing what any decent person would do. He has no idea that his split-second decision to protect a stranger will shatter the balance of galactic power, expose centuries-old conspiracies, and prove that humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our weapons. It's our willingness to sacrifice everything for someone we've never met. What happens when the person you save without thinking turns out to be the most wanted, most feared, and most powerful individual in known space? What happens when your simple act of human decency becomes the spark that ignites a revolution across a million worlds? Marcus is about to find out that in a galaxy where strength is measured in fleets and firepower, sometimes the most dangerous weapon of all is a human who refuses to walk away from someone in trouble. The adventure begins now, in the darkest corner of the most forgotten level of Nexus Station, where a maintenance worker's ordinary day is about to become anything but ordinary.